Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. This is Khalil Jahshan from Arab Center, Washington, D.C., welcoming you to a webinar focusing today on Israeli elections 4.0, Israel's political crisis and impact on the Palestinians. We hope to shed some new light on the Israeli elections. Of course, the final results are not out yet. But as you know, more than 4.4 million Israeli voters, about 67.2% of all eligible voters in Israel went to the polls yesterday in an unprecedented for the fourth time in 2 years or less, to elect a new parliament, the 24th Knesset since 1948. With nearly 90% of the vote counted, the Likud party has succeeded in keeping the lead with about 30 Knesset seats thus far, almost twice as much as the 17th seats secured by its next competitor in line, Yesh Atid, led by former journalist Yair Lapid. Although Netanyahu pulled a slightly better than expected victory, frankly, I mean, he was expected all along to get 28 to 29 seats, so he got a little bit more. But Likud, of course, continues to face a formidable challenge in forming the next government, since both the right-wing alliance led by Likud and the left-wing opposition lack a clear and easy path to a majority coalition to be able to govern. What is clear, however, is that Netanyahu is the most likely candidate to continue as Prime Minister of Israel, barring, of course, any legal surprises awaiting him the next few months in terms of the serious corruption charges that he continues to face in Israeli court. But based on the results we have seen this morning, it is safe to conclude several key points about Israeli politics in 2021 and beyond. First, I would say that the continued dominance of Likud-led right-wing parties in Israel for the foreseeable future will continue. That dominance is undergoing both a quantitative and a qualitative surge, with the addition of new elements. Kahanists, Jewish supremacist elements are part of the coalition now, and one would assume that they will play a part in the new government. Second, corollary to that, the erosion of the Israeli left and center is proceeding with little hope for significant change expected soon. Third, the marginalization, I would say, of the Palestinian Arab vote in Israel as Arab society splinters into various communal, confessional, ideological camps, and definitely their numbers have dropped at least 4 seats in the results we have seen today from the 15 that they had before during the last election. Fourth, coalition politics that dominated Israel since its establishment in 1948 and led to governing paralysis, particularly over the past 4 or 5 years, is here to stay, it appears, and there is no light. At least I do not see a light at the end of this dark tunnel, and we hope that our participants will shed more light on that. Yesterday's election, ladies and gentlemen, was not a conventional election, even by Israeli standards. It was not open, dynamic competition between what we started with, 39 different lists or parties submitting, or applying for permission to run and competing over ideas, policies, platforms. Instead, this was a narrow referendum about Benjamin Netanyahu. It was essentially a battle between what is known as the Just Bibi camp and the Never Bibi camp over occupying the prime minister's seat. No serious debate over the economy, which was surprising. No serious debate over foreign policy, over relations with Arab neighbors, particularly new Arab neighbors with new relations with Israel, with some serious issues now separating them. The recent conflict with Jordan and other future relations with the Palestinians, future relations with the United States. No serious debate about some of these vital issues. So based on that, my staff has already recommended to me this morning that we need to start planning for a future panel within few months entitled Israeli Elections 5.0, in the sense that the estimate is that there will be a fifth election, most probably, over the next few months. To help us tackle these issues and other endless questions raised by yesterday's elections, we are very fortunate and honored to have with us today an excellent panel of experts with rich and varied experience with Israeli politics, from academia to activism to journalism, women's rights, minority rights, and so on. I will introduce them in the order that they will speak. We will start today with Tamir Sorek, who is a liberal arts professor of Middle Eastern history at Pennsylvania State University. He's well known for his expertise, particularly on the Arab citizens of Israel, has written a lot on that over the years, but on Israeli politics in general. The next speaker will be Amal Jamal, who will be joining us in a few minutes. He's right now finishing his lecture in class, and he will be joining us in just a couple of minutes. He's professor of political science at Tel Aviv University. Next will be Amira, Israeli journalist, well recognized worldwide for her coverage as Haaretz correspondent for the occupied territories. Her writings on the Palestinians are definitely unmatched and have been a good resource for all kinds of experts over the years. And last but not least, my fellow Nazarene from the city of Nazareth, Areen Hawari is joining us. Areen is director of the Gender Studies program at Mada al-Carmel Arab Center for Applied Social Research in Haifa. Each speaker will speak for about 12 minutes or so, to be followed by a Q&A session from the audience. Your questions are welcome. And as customary at Arab Center Washington, most of you have attended our events in the past. It's done in writing. Please enter your brief questions by pushing the Q&A tab at the bottom of your page. Include, if you don't mind, your name, your affiliation, if any, and the name of the panelist to whom it's addressed. That will be visible to me, and I will be more than glad to read your questions and direct it to the right person on the panel. With that said, Tamir, the microphone is yours. Please activate your microphone, and we are ready to hear from you.
Good morning, Khalil, and thank you for inviting me. Thank you for the Arab Center and for the Institute for Palestine Studies to invite me. And thank you, Amira and Areen and Amal for sharing with me this panel. I watched yesterday the 3 channels of Israeli politics. Whenever people shout at each other, so I switch to the other panel so I can listen to people talking. And I would like to refer to 3 points, 3 elements that I think they are interconnected and they represent wider processes. The first thing is that it looks like there is a growing legitimacy among at least some parts of the Israeli political spectrum for the inclusion of Palestinian citizens of Israel in Israeli politics. The first interviewee in one of the channel was Mansour Abbas from the Arab United List. And this is a process that maybe we can sign it already in the first Intifada, when the Zionist left understood that in order to fulfill their dream about the so-called Jewish democratic state, they need to collaborate with the Palestinian citizens of Israel. And we saw ups and downs in this. There is no doubt that the assassination of Rabin was related to this. Actually, Yigal Amir, who shot Rabin, said it explicitly that his concern was that the Arabs are deciding the fate of the state. But in recent years, we see a growing legitimacy. I think it is a question of survival of the secular Zionists. In the last, after the last elections, the polls show that between 70 and 80% of the supporters of the opposition parties were in favor of including the United List. So this is one process that we see here. And the other process is seemingly contradicting this, because what we see last night is the complete absence of the discussion of the Palestinians under occupation. They were not there. No reference to settlements, to the occupation, to the apartheid, to one-state solution, two-state solutions. It was out of the spectrum. And the last thing, which is the exception of what I said now, was Netanyahu's speech, because Netanyahu's speech referred to the potential international pressure that Israel might face, and twice in his speech he referred to the international court and the need of Israel to unite around this international pressure. So it is certainly something that concerns him, and he also understands that it might be a way to unite certain elements of Israeli politics, Zionist politics around him. Now, how all these three elements are related? I think that what's happening among the secular Zionist parts of the political map is that they understood their survival existential need in collaborating with the Palestinian citizens. But at the same time, they can do it only if they define the Israeli citizenship as the relevant boundaries of solidarity. Because once they extend it to beyond the green line, there is no Jewish majority. So they have to go on this line of embracing the Palestinian citizens of Israel without acknowledging that they are part of a broader ethno-national political community in Palestine. And this is a very delicate game that the Zionist secular Israelis are trying to play. And I think it is an impossible game to play, and because you can see at Haaretz, the Haaretz is shrinking and shrinking because they cannot find this narrow path between being both a Zionist and leftist. And in the long term, it's a vanishing word. This is what we call Zionist left. And now I would like to touch another element which is related, because I think the main axe of Israeli politics at the moment is the struggle between the secular and the religious justification of Jewish supremacy. And this is what's happening now, because seemingly it's only about Netanyahu. Yes, baby, no, baby. And seemingly the anti-Netanyahu camp is so diverse and the pro-Netanyahu camp is diverse. But if you look at the voters of the parties who are against Netanyahu, let's call it the anti-Netanyahu camp, they are over proportionally secular, and this secularism is increasing with the years. And the pro-Netanyahu camp is becoming more and more religious, and with more and more emphasis on the need to make the state working according to Jewish tradition and religion. I want to show you one graph that illustrates that. I analyzed surveys from 2009. Let me share this. Okay, so this is what you see here. I analyzed survey from 2009 and from 2020, the beginning of the Netanyahu era, and this the second one is from the elections of last year, just after during the elections and after the election. What you see here is that at the beginning of the Netanyahu era, 32% of the people who voted for the parties who supported Netanyahu, recommended him to be the prime minister, thought that it's definitely important that the government will make sure that Israel is conducted according to the Jewish religious tradition. And this percentage increased to 44% in 2020, while in the other camp, it declined from 11 to 5. So what we see here, we see a polarization among Jewish voters regarding religion. And it's partly related also probably to the emergence of the social media, because it tends to polarize, and we see it also. But also there is a deeper element here. And the deeper element is the need of people in the pro-Netanyahu camp to justify Jewish supremacy in religious terms. Why? Because class-wise, they are in a much lower position. And this is another element. What we see with the years, that education become, like in the United States, a stronger predictor of voting in Israeli elections. So in order to keep their privileges, voters of Netanyahu are more likely to stick to their Jewish identity and to demand a more and clearer identity of the state as Jewish. The anti-Netanyahu camp are less, their privileges, they rely less on the Jewish identity of the state. It does not mean that they do not aspire for Jewish supremacy, but the justification they require for it is different than people in the other camp. So basically, we have here two dimensions of Israeli politics that interact with each other. Is the question of what are the boundaries of the political community, to what extent Palestinians are part or not part of this discussion. And this, unlike what sometimes is reflected in the public discourse, it is not a linear process of marginalization of the Palestinian citizens of Israel. And on the other side, there is a very strong struggle over the place of religion in politics. I will just make two anecdotes here, is that the two newcomers to the anti-Netanyahu camps, one is Lieberman, whose voters need secular marriage because many of them are not considered Jewish by the state. So he followed his voters toward the anti-Netanyahu camp in order to need the secular camp. And just anecdotically, Gideon Saar, it is not a coincidence that his daughter, it's a gossip, but his daughter had an Arab boyfriend. Okay, now it is a gossip element, but it could not have happened for someone who is now in the pro-Netanyahu camp when they are embracing a neo-Nazi approach of being opposing any kind of racially mixed couples. This is significant part of the pro-Netanyahu coalition. So I think I completed my 12 minutes that were allocated to me, so I will stop here and I will answer questions later. And thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Tamir. A lot of food for thought here. So I'm sure that will generate some interest in terms of the Q&A session afterwards. We were expecting Amal Jamal to join us in about a minute or two. I don't think Amal has joined us yet, correct? So let's go ahead, and if you don't mind, Amira, let's move to you, and then we will pick up with Amal as soon as he joins us. Amira will shed some more light from her perspective of someone who's covering the Palestinian side, not just her comments on the Israeli elections, but also on their impact on the Palestinian side, particularly in light of the expected elections that are coming soon in Palestine. Let me just make an announcement that I overlooked earlier when I started this webinar. This is a joint venture, actually, between Arab Center DC and the Institute of Palestine Studies. We are delighted to do that from time to time, and we're looking forward to cementing that relationship, particularly when it comes to issues pertaining to Israel and Palestine. So we welcome our colleagues, our friends from the Institute for Palestine Studies, and we look forward to future events, including one that's still being planned next month, about the elections in Palestine. Amira, the microphone is yours.
Thank you, and hello to everybody, and thank you, Tamir. I always learn from you new things or see new angles. I'll zoom in to the big winners, as I see it, in the West Bank. These are the two parties. One of it's called Religious Zionism of Smotrich and Ben Gvir, the Kahanist, and the other one of Naftali Bennett Yamina. The percentage of voters that they enjoyed in the settlements is much higher than what they got in the general public, Israeli public. For example, the settlement of Bet El, which is nearby and my place here in El Bire, and built on the lands of El Bire and Ramallah and other Palestinian villages around, the Smotrich party, the Smotrich and Ben Gvir party, received 74% of their votes, as contrary to 5% in the general population. Bennett's party received around 20 to 40% in different settlements, which is a decline for him, in comparison to 6% in the general public. So the power of these two parties, we cannot calculate it only in the general figures, as it is in their deep involvement in anything that is happening in the control domination over the West Bank, Palestinians in the West Bank, the space, the geopolitical situation in the West Bank, including East Jerusalem. For me, these two have been the government in practice, the government de facto in the West Bank for very long. They are voters and they are elected representatives, have acted for many years in parties, in so-called or apparently non-governmental organizations such as Gush Emunim or Regavim, and these organizations push the Israeli official authorities to act more against the Palestinian and to grab more of their land and resources. They also acted, these people, these elected and voters, acted as individuals in order to maximize the interests, the accomplishment of the interest of the settlements. So they are not new in town, of course. And the interests are, as you can all imagine, to expand, to enjoy ever-developing infrastructure, to connect to Israel in roads and in the water infrastructure, to attract more Israelis to live here, to create blocks of settlements, that those that are becoming kind of a, that it's becoming kind of a mantra in Israel that you cannot remove blocks of settlements, and to advance to annexation, de facto and de jure. They have been doing this through deep involvement in the offices of the civil administration, which is the arm of the Israeli government here in the West Bank. They are officials, they are high officers, high projectors, they have mentors over the civil administration. They are in the army, they are in the Shabak, they are in the police, they are in the settlements council, local councils, and in Israeli normal ministerial offices. So they are everywhere, in every spot which decides about the fate of the West Bank. For sure, they would not have succeeded to do it if the Israeli governments would not have sent them here and would not have allocated them with this mission. If the Israeli governments did not cling to the colonialist project and did not initiate the disconnection of the West Bank from Gaza, the Gaza Strip, and disconnecting the East Jerusalem from the rest. But the settlements knew all the time to initiate, to demand more, and to influence more and more on more and more Israeli publics in Israel proper. And the main influence I see in this process of the last 25, 30 years, which is parallel to the Oslo process, that the space that the whole world accepted as a Palestinian space was supposed to turn into a Palestinian state. So that the space, which is Gaza, West Bank, including East Jerusalem, that had scattered Israeli enclaves. That the world understood have to be removed. So this Palestinian space has turned over these 30 years into an Israeli space with Palestinian enclaves. This is the reality. All the Israeli governments since Rabin had a great part in it. And so it's clear it is a planned policy. It is not something that happens incidentally or because of some individuals wanted it. The role of the settlements here was to make sure that the settlements remain small as possible and as disconnected from each other. And this has worked for them. And when I say the settlers, I say exactly the same kind of people who now got these votes in Yamina and Tzionut Datit. So with no connection to the elections in Israel, the general elections in Israel, these parties with the civil administration are the real government in the West Bank. And when I say the real government, it's not over the settlers in the settlements, the Israeli citizens. Of course, they are the government over indigenous population, the indigenous Palestinian population that does not have the right to vote and to choose the government that decides about such important aspect of its life and future. So we see here a combination of continuity in the means and the goals of the Israeli regime, but also a pushing to the extremes of those means and the goals that the settlers and the settler parties are responsible for this. One of the initiatives of those settler groups and organizations and non-governmental organizations is to pass from construction to agriculture and from agriculture to the herding of cattle and sheep. Because they have realized that they don't get enough people to move from Israel to the West Bank. So the area that they control remains relatively modest, not as much as they would like. So agriculture, and even more so, the herding of sheep and cattle allows them to expand to larger areas, Palestinian areas, of course, all over the West Bank. And this is planned. And this is thought. This is well thought. And this cannot happen without a lot of violence. Intimidation of shepherds, intimidation of farmers. This violence has always been here, the settlers' violence. And the settlers' violence was always overlooked by the Israeli institutions, law enforcement institutions. But now this violence is really much more organized. And it is not just an expression of supremacy, of racism, it is strategic violence. which is working. Israelis have been, just prior to the elections, there were some incidents that managed to shock some Israelis, but in general, everything which has to do with the situation in Gaza and the West Bank, the Israeli domination over these two areas, is not part of the elections. Occupation is a word that deters voters. So is The Hague. And for me, it shows that the Israelis, including those secular Zionists, have wholeheartedly accepted the reality of the Palestinian enclaves and accepted the lie that this is the end of the occupation because the Palestinian enclaves have their own government, so-called government. And because the Israeli army is not in the Palestinian, not permanently in the Palestinian enclaves. So these enclaves are the real compromise, the Israeli compromise, internal Israeli compromise, between a wish or a dream or a goal that the Palestinians disappear, and the understanding that right now we cannot expel them, we cannot get rid of them, banish them. But here we have the two parties, and especially the one of Smotrich and Ben Gvir, that are openly supporting expulsion under the guise of a test of a loyalty test that they want to pass to give to Palestinians. So if they are not loyal, they should leave. 30, 40 years ago, when Kahana, the spiritual father of Ben Gvir, was in the Knesset, he was almost ostracized, also by Likud. Today, it's Netanyahu who wanted Ben Gvir to be in the be elected to the Knesset. So not by accident, those two parties are among the or are always very happy when there is a chance for war. They have a role. They are supporters, and some of their Knesset members, not all, have always had a military background. And they are proud with the many religious Zionists who are in the army now and getting higher in the ranks. They want wars because wars may allow Israel and Israeli groups to do things such as massive destruction and expulsion, things that you cannot do so easily in quieter days. I see that their role, their impact, influence in the West Bank, including Jerusalem, and you all know how Jerusalem is also disseminated to slums, disconnected slums that are terrorized by Israeli right wing. So their impact in these areas and the fact that they, on the one hand, they implement an Israeli policy, but they also upgrade this policy. All this increases their power. And I see this as a very frightening prospect. They are very dangerous to all of us, but especially to the Palestinians.
Thank you, Amira, for highlighting this very important issue that's not quite familiar to many of us, being so far away from the field, if you will. Amira, if you don't mind, I might ask your camera somehow in the middle of your presentation.
Yeah, sure.
Drop down a little bit. So okay. We'd love to see your full face. There you go. Thank you very much. So let's go ahead now and move to our third speaker, Areen Hawari, who's the director of the Gender Studies program at Mada al-Carmel in Haifa. And she will also give us her reaction to the elections this time. And particularly, I guess, would love to hear from her about the divisions within the Arab community there in terms of the vote pattern, and particularly with her focus on gender issues and the feminist movement. If she could also talk a little bit about the role of women in Israeli elections in general. Areen, the microphone is yours. If you don't mind turning the microphone on and proceed.
Yeah, shukran. Thank you, Khalil. Thank you for the other speakers. I'm happy to be here and thank you for the invitation. I'll talk a little bit about the new Israeli scene or what new is in the Israeli elections. After that, I'll talk about a little bit about the Palestinian politics, parliamentarian politics in Israel. And I hope I will have time to talk about the feminist issues or dealing with the situation from feminist perspective, how feminist issues and values are used or actually abused within this Israeli context. So I will start, as Amira already said, we see, and after the elections, we can talk about a raise of the power of the religious Israeli parties, the religious Zionist parties, and the religious Haredi parties who became ally of the Likud and specifically Netanyahu in the recent years. We are talking now also about a new versions of, or the new generations of right in Israel. It's not only the religious settler right that we know, but also the Kahanist one. It's not only the apartheid right, but also the transferist right is becoming, they were all the time, they existed all the time, but now they are becoming legitimate in the Israeli scene as could be part of the Israeli government. The Kahanist parties were out of legitimacy in Israel, not only according to the left Zionists in Israel, and not only according to the center of the Israeli parliamentarian scene. They were illegitimate also according to the Likud in Israel. I just heard Limor Livnat before some days in an interview. She said how she remembers when Kahana entered some place, some of the Israeli Likud leaders used to leave the place. So we can imagine what are we talking about, which Israel we are talking about in 2001. And within the Israeli context now, we are not seeing, you don't see, as Tamir said, we don't see like any discourse, any advertisements, any discussions over the occupation, because they already finished everything. The Israel controls everything. There is no need to discussion. The Palestinians are silenced. They don't need to discuss even to discuss these things. So we can talk about a competition, as Dr. Muhammad Mustafa said, of different versions or different kinds of right. Is it the ideological right or the institutional right or the populist right or the Kahanist right? It's different versions of right. Within it's very clear within all the hegemonic right in context in Israel, they all agree, all of them. They all agree over keeping the settlements or increasing the settlements, the siege on Gaza, the idea of the nationality law, even if they do not agree with the details of Israel as a nation state law, they all agree of this concept and of these values. So the result of the Israeli elections now, it could be in any constellation, it will be a right-wing government. I want to talk a little bit about the Zionist left in Israel, or so-called Zionist left, and then I'll talk about Palestinian politics. Again, with all the Zionist left in Israel are part of the Zionist hegemonic discourse to talk about Israel as a Jewish state and to defend and to protect Israel. I will cite just two leaders of the Zionist parties, and then I will talk about the way they view the Arabs, the right and the left. Tamir thought that it is like we are becoming more legitimate in Israel. I'll talk about it. Just let me cite Mirav Michaeli, the head of the Labour Party, who is viewed as a new generation in the Labour Party, a new leader. She's known as feminist within the Israeli context. And she succeeded to bring a feminist Palestinian woman to be part of her party. Mirav just said the decision of the High Court, the court in Hague, is difficult and problematic. The court exercised power that was not within its authority and imposed them on the Israeli. It was in a way that distorted the situation, and that she said that she is proud of the Israeli court and the Israeli military, as she calls it, Sahel. So this is the head of the Israeli Labour Party that everyone said that she's a left and a feminist woman. Yair Golan, the candidate number 3 in Meretz, again, the leftist party in Israel, he just said, I served 38 years in Sahel. I was shot in the battle. It is possible that I will be interrogated for my security work in Hague. So I won't accept any preaching over Zionism from a racist right who did not do what I did, a little of what I did. Like, he's proud of what he did, and he's proud that he will be investigated in Hague. So this is the third leader of the Zionist leftist party. Not to mention that also the second one, what's her name? I just what's her name? The second candidate of Meretz? No problem. I will remember. I don't
have the list in front of me. Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, what's her name? I missed the name now. Okay, so she said, Tamar. I'm sorry, Tamar Zandberg. Yeah. She just said she was afraid that Meretz will fall down. So she said if Meretz didn't fall down, Meretz will support and will protect and all the Gush, all the group. Like, she means all the other group, not Netanyahu. So she feels herself part of all the others. And she is talking about she was talking before the elections about being part of the government. So she is not even talking about being opposition. She wants to be part of the not Netanyahu coalition. In any constellation, the not Netanyahu coalition is a right coalition, of course, and she wants to be part of it. I want to talk a little bit about the way the Zionist left see the Arabs and why they become legitimate, or even also with Netanyahu. It's not that we became legitimate. We were all the time legitimate as long as we don't have our national project. And like, historically, the Arabs it's the new generation that you don't view the Arabs within the Zionist parties. They were all the time in the Zionist party, but we are without our national project. What is new now, that they use a new figures that we used to see them in the civil society. We used to see them as colleagues. This is new, but I will talk about Meretz. Meretz is very well known in Israel as a secular party. More than half, most of its program and its slogans talking about individual rights, sexual rights, dividing state and religion. This is the project of Meretz. But when it comes to Arab, the Arabs are not. They don't have to be secular. They don't have to talk about individual rights at all, because they are not coming. They are not representing human rights. They are not presenting sexual rights. They are not presenting secular rights. They are representing the Arabs. So you can be whoever you are. Once Hosni Jbara was representative of the Arabs in Meretz, the leftist party, and she said that she does not agree of any change in the personal status law, in the religious conservative personal status law in Israel. Tawfiq Khatib once was a member of Islamic movements, and when he left the Islamic movement, he made a lie, halaf, with Meretz. You cannot imagine that any of the religious parties in Israel would be ally with Meretz, because they don't think alike. But when you are Arab, anyway, you are filling the place of the Arab. You are not filling, I mean, according to the racist approach of Haaretz, the secular party, the party who talks about liberal rights. And now the same with Ghida Renawi, even though now you are taking the new generation, civil society activists. Ghida Renawi feels very, very relaxed when she talks about her opposition to supporting sexual rights, not sexual rights, to supporting the law that does not agree of changing the gays, changing their orientation. She said, I won't agree with that. Why she does not agree with this? Because she is part of her community. She said, I'm part of my community. I'm part of my society. As if our society, you know, is a strict society that cannot be changed, and we had no dynamics in this community, and as if we are like only conservative community. And but it's not the way, only the way she views her community or her society, but it's the way that she has all the permission from Haaretz to say whatever she wants, only to bring or to bring votes to the elections. Do I have 3-4 minutes to talk about Arab parties? Okay, shukran. Khalil, I'm sorry. You know, it's very strange and very difficult to talk. Khalil presented me as an academic, but I am talking now not only as academic and mainly not as an academic. I'm talking about as a Palestinian activist, political activist. Like, it's the first time that I see, and even if I, as a researcher, I would never have this analysis. I would never expect the reverse that we are feeling and we feel as Palestinians in our national project, in our political project. After 20 years of hegemonic discourse over the state of its citizens, over hegemonic discourse that our case as Palestinians in Israel did not start. It started in 48. The issue of occupation and Israel's crimes did not start in 67. It started in 48. So our point of reference is 48 and next 67. And we are, as Palestinians, not part of the Palestinian case, and we are part of the solution. This is the political discourse the new Palestinian generation brought 20 years before. After this context, this hegemonic discourse now, and after the joint list specifically, at that time that Israel in the climax, let's say, of the fascism and the Kahanism, we see that the joint list that was like all the time the objective of Balad, we will have one joint list for all the Palestinians. Instead of having to make it higher, the ceiling, we are having the opposite exactly. We can see it started by recommending Gantz in the elections before, and now we continue to see it. All the slogans, all the advertisements of the joint list, I mean Jabha and Tajammu', Balad and the Democratic Front, they talk only about not Netanyahu. Like, if you say only not Netanyahu, so we can compete with every other Zionist party. I get every day, me and all the others, messages from Yair Lapid, from Meretz, from even Netanyahu, Abu Yair, who talks about, I will solve the problem of the crime in the Arab community. I will change the cabinets. Yair Lapid sent us, we will change the cabinets, the law that talks about house demolition. That means if you are talking about only civil discourse, if the Palestinian case is not existent in the project of the joint list, then we can compete with all the Zionist parties. They can give us the same discourse of joint list. Within this situation and within this context, I don't see what is happening with Mansour Abbas. I mean, from the Southern Islamic movement. It's strange. It's not strange, because if we started to recommend the Gantz, who is not less than Netanyahu in his political view and his army history, so it's what Abbas Mansour is doing is not very, it's not very strange. I just want to say that because I don't know the audience, what does the audience knows. Abbas Mansour not only did not mention any of the political national agenda that I don't even expect it from him. He was just interviewed in the morning in I think in Reshet Bet in the Israeli TV radio. They asked him, "What do you say about Netanyahu, who said that he is not considering any not Zionist party?" Then he answered, "No, but he is in the coalition with." He's in the coalition with the Haredim, who are not Zionist party. And then they asked him, "Can you say what you think of Zionism?" And he said, "You know, after I didn't sleep at night, I cannot talk about political and philosophical politics. It's a question of philosophy. Zionism, each student of each child of fourth class can talk about Zionism, about Zionist project." He didn't say anything about the Zionist project. Within all its campaign to the elections, you did not hear, you cannot find any word about Al-Aqsa. Not to mention all Palestine, Al-Aqsa. It's the most sacred place for all the Muslims and for the Islamic movements. They didn't mention Al-Aqsa. You know what they mentioned? And here I will talk a little bit about the feminist and the misuse of the feminist issue. They talked only about their opposition to the so-called secular parties in issues of sexual rights, because they are against the gays, and they thought that in this is the niche that they can talk about and protect. As always, if you talk about against sexual rights, against women, against feminist issues, you can gain the community and the people and the votes, as long as you don't have national project, as you don't have anything else but this. Within this context, I'm very sorry to say that we see the fifth candidate in the Islamic movement, women. Now we have 3, 4, 5 maybe women in the Knesset, but lacking our feminist issue and our feminist agenda, and lacking the gender approach. And again, because of the incitement against the gays, we find a woman, the fifth representative of the Islamic movement. Again, you know, the last, I know it's not my time. I hope in the discussion to answer about more issues about women's politics and representation. But one thing I want to say, as a feminist activist in a party, part of Balad party, I am very used to be criticized as Jabha and Tajammu, Balad and the Democratic Front, that we don't support the gays, the LGBT rights. You know what, now if you talk to the LGBT activists, they don't expect us to support them. They just ask the Palestinian politics, please don't use us and don't incite against us in your campaigns. So this is what they expect from us. Last but not least, I think if we want to defeat Netanyahu and to defeat the fascism and the Kahanism in Israel, we should confront Israel as a settler colonial project. We should have go with solidarity, with the international solidarity with anti-Zionist Jews, taking all the social rights and individual rights, and not to withdraw, I mean, as a so-called secular parties against the Islamic parties when it comes to social and feminist rights. And thank you. I'm sorry for taking more time.
No, that's fine. Thank you, Areen. Again, you raised quite a few issues. I hope they will generate additional questions for verifying some of these facts that you mentioned somewhat in a hurry. So hopefully we'll have a little more time to explore these. Okay, let's go ahead and start with the Q&A session. We have several questions already received. The first one is from our good friend, Paul Sham, who's a professor of Israeli studies at the University of Maryland, and it's addressed to Tamir. Paul would like, he said basically first, excellent analysis. He liked your presentation. And he says that you seem to see politics as driving religion among Bibi voters. While I think the dynamic is the other way around. That is more dangerous, which is why Bibi's own plans are moderate compared to them. When Bibi is finally gone, don't you think the political leadership of the right will pass to the religious right, thus creating even more societal and diplomatic frictions? Your thoughts are appreciated on that.
Hello, Paul. Good to see you virtually. I think it goes both ways. And there is a mutual feeding of Netanyahu's personality and the religiosity of his camp. And I have no doubt that once Netanyahu disappears, the fight over the place of religion in the ideological justification of the Israeli regime will remain there. Netanyahu is not the cause of that, is only an embodiment of very deep processes, sociological and political processes. So I agree with you.
Thank you, Tamir. The next question is from George Tawil, and it's addressed to Amira. Does it really make any difference to the Palestinians in the West Bank who wins the elections or forms the next government in Israel? More settlements and violence was committed by labor than Likud, after all. Amira?
Yes and no. It's true that, when we talk about Netanyahu, when we concentrate on one person or one party or similar, we forget that there is, as Areen said, it is a project. And because unlike in Israel, the Palestinians, the victims of the the initial Israeli colonialist project, but they are citizens. So they are protected by in some aspects, in a way that the Palestinians in the West Bank and Gaza are not. So there it makes a difference if we have more Kahanists in the government, or if we have even people like Yair Golan. And it's it's being pragmatic, but it's being pragmatic about things which are crucial. Most of the leaders of the Israeli Zionist parties, secular parties, and which are not considered extreme right wing, have a military background, and and I'm sure that they killed more Palestinians than any Palestinian life prisoner in Israeli jails. What's important is they are public. What's important is the people who support them and how they envision the future and the reality. When you have people who support expulsion, when you have more people who support expulsion, more representatives who support expulsion of Palestinians, expulsion out of the country, or concentrating more Palestinians in their enclaves, it might succeed, and it might come to an irreversible points. What we learned during the Second Intifada, that it can get worse, and when it gets worse, it does not open the window to a better chance. It really gets worse. So there is a difference. There is a difference, and I think that's why it's difficult, because the Israeli center has gone very much to the right wing, and if in the eve of the Oslo process, you felt there was a great group of Israeli peaceniks, not leftists, but people who understood that we have to, in order to think of another future, we have to come to terms with the Palestinian minimal demand for a state in the 67 occupied territory. Not because it is ideal for the Palestinians, but because it leashes out another process, which is contradictory to the process of wars and of annexation. But there was a great group of Israelis who indeed supported it. So what happened is that they are their leaders, Likud and Labor, the labor leaders, cheated on them in a very cunning way, So they used the Oslo process, the Oslo negotiations that I myself opposed to it from the start because I saw the cheat behind it. But there was a big battalion of Israeli or big division of Israeli, whatever we call it, who wanted to see an end of occupation in 1967 and really a Palestinian state, and didn't mind if the settlements would have been dismantled. So it does matter. It does make a difference. It does make a difference because I am afraid of the worst scenarios, and I see that whenever we have a government which is more to the right wing and more religiously motivated, the expulsionist agenda and vocabulary are much stronger and can be realized.
Thank you, Amira. This is one of the kind of almost permanent questions in Arab-Israeli matters, particularly on the Palestinian issue, that question continues to rise again and again and again. So 72 years after the establishment of the State of Israel. Is there, or showing that there is a discrepancy in the full understanding of the difference between different factions in Israel, and the same thing on the Israeli side, misunderstanding of differences within the different camps on the Palestinian side. It's one aspect of the continuing tragedy there that we have to continue to raise the same question again and again. But at any rate, let's move to the next question. It's from David Abraham, and this one is to Areen. You did mention in your presentation some of the issues pertaining to Haaretz's position and some of the racism on the left, if you will, the left platform for Jewish voters, but will accept Arab voters as a necessary compromise in order to build a mixed Palestinian Jewish party. But the joint list also has tried to have progressives and conservatives kind of coexist together within the movement. So this is kind of common to all the different groups, correct? Microphone.
Sorry. Yeah, I agree that within the Palestinian parties, so-called secular parties, we have also conservative and also progressive, but this is my criticism over my party and the Palestinian parties. Of course, I disagree with that. It's that's why we are all the time criticizing our political parties, but at least they do not present themselves as the LGBT supporters or as the feminist supporting all the feminist agenda all the time. Actually, no, they were all the time. We work on politics and the negotiations with our parties towards these issues. But the difference is that Haaretz is main agenda. Its first agenda is basic agenda is talking about these individual rights. Like in our parties, I mean, we all the time negotiate, like, let's say, sexual rights or personal status rights. But as for Haaretz, it's their mandate. So I would understand that Palestinian would leave I won't understand, of course, but I won't accept, but I would understand as an analyst, let's say, that Palestinian would leave the Arab parties because she or he agrees with their secular individual rights agenda, liberal agenda. But as a Palestinian, to go to Haaretz and not to talk about their social agenda. So why are you talking about their Jewish state or about the history of Yair Golan in military? Like, why are you as Palestinian there? So of course I agree that we are negotiating with our parties, but this is the way politics works.
All right, thank you, Areen. I'd like to welcome Amal, Jamal. Thank you for joining us. And what we would like to do, we did already start the Q&A because your colleagues finished their presentation. So if you don't mind, we'll give you the next 12 minutes to make your presentation. As I said earlier in introducing the speakers, Amal is Professor of Political Science at Tel Aviv University, and we welcome his reaction to the tentative Israeli election results from yesterday, and if he could particularly focus also on not just the general results of the election, but specifically on what happened to the Arab vote yesterday, whether that is a long-term change or a temporary kind of setback for the Arab community in Israel. Dr. Amal, please, tfaddal.
Hi, everybody. I'm terribly sorry there had been a misunderstanding. I thought we start now. In the coordination conversations, I spoke about 6 p.m. my time because I just finished teaching now. So I'm sorry that there has been a misunderstanding. Anyways, thank you very much for inviting me. I'm glad to be here. I'm terribly sorry, Tamir and Areen and everybody else, Amira, that I missed your talks. Anyways, I have four insights to say. One is I think what the Israeli political system is facing now is a result of a long-term processes taking place in Israeli society. That we can reduce them into the problem facing Benjamin Netanyahu now, but it's not a personal issue only. I think the political system in Israel has been facing polarization processes that are actually translated in these elections, as well as in the previous 3 elections, boycotting each other. And the boycotting, of course, is concentrated on one personality as if he is the only problem. I think the ability to lead to a stable majority coalition is much larger than Netanyahu's place in the system, saying that if Netanyahu leaves tomorrow, the question is, will there be a stable coalition for a long time? And in my view, it's going to be not as much, but still problematic, because the problems are much deeper than one person, and the differences are very, very long-standing, and the fragmentation taking place, reflecting actually the social processes, the deeper social processes in the Israeli society, and are translated into the institutional system via 40 parties running for elections, 3 or 4 people running for the prime ministership, so many small parties, trying to squeeze the government or squeeze the prime minister in order to gain whatever possible for their own communities. This is one point. The second point, I think part of this is actually what's going on with the Arab parties, or the place of the Arab parties in the Israeli political system. I think this is the first time we see that both camps in Israel, the conservative nationalist camp and the liberal national camp, fully understand that without the Arab parties, they will not be able to rule for a long period of time. Meaning that the Jewish society is split almost in the middle and fragmented to an extent that it will be almost impossible for any of them to build a coalition, a lasting coalition or a stable coalition for a long period of time. And I think the person who was able to read this situation is Mansour Abbas, is the Islamic Party. And he is not introducing something new into the system. This tactic of negotiating with the Jewish parties, with Zionist parties in order to promote or represent, enhance the basic rights of the Palestinian citizens, has been part of the system from its beginning. The issue is that their negotiations was limited only to the center-left part of the political system, and opening this strategy, tactic to both sides of the political system is something new. I think something that wishes to maximize the impact of the Arab community on the Israeli political system, saying that without taking us into consideration, it would be impossible for any of you to build a coalition. And since we are not loyal to any of both camps, and we are willing to go with any, it changes the entire political game. And I think we have to take this into consideration. And here I would like to say that the numbers don't play much role here. In the sense, the joint list was composed of 15 seats in the last elections. And as a result of not willing to play this game and to be loyal to one camp only or negotiate with one camp only, the number didn't play, the big number didn't play any role. The joint list was not effective in the system the way the Arab community wished it to be. Now, with 4 seats or 5 seats, the Islamic Party, Ram, is able to play this game as a result of the shift in its positioning within the system, which means sometimes systematically in such systems, a small number is able to gain more than big number according to, of course, the willingness or the ability to play, to change the rules of the game and play according to a new game that you, as a small party, can impose on the system. Does that mean that the Arab community actually wished for such a strategy? And I have to pose the question, if this was wished for by the entire Arab community, how come the joint list did not reflect this sentiment? If this was the wish of the Arab community, how come they did not vote more for Mansour Abbas and his party? I think these questions have to be answered, and my answer, my brief answer, is that the Arab community wants to be part of the game, but with certain limits, with certain rules, with certain red lines. And the average of voting in the Arab community, I think, reflects this very well. If we look at the 4 last rounds of elections, in April 2019, there were two parties, a different constellation than this time, but still 2 parties. The average participation in the Arab community was around 52%, 53%. In September, when the joint list, when the 2 parties joined, the average participation went up 6%. Again, in March 20, when the joint list appeared to be a good player and appeared to unite the Arab voice and Arab vote and maybe become effective in the system, the March 20 elections brought another 2 seats to the joint list, meaning another 5% in the average of participation in the Arab community, which means the Arab community has marked to the joint system, joint list, what exactly it wants. They wanted actually more seats in order to be more effective in the system. I'm not saying that they actually all wanted the joint list to do what Mansour Abbas is doing now, but actually they wanted this direction. They wanted a new rules of the game. They wanted a new discourse. They wanted more innovative form of politics that will enable the joint list to be more effective in the system. The problem is twofold. One, that there are ideological parties within the joint list that were not willing to go that far, and they were forced to do so. When it came up to recommending Benny Gantz to prime ministership, we saw the split within the joint list, and as a result of the mechanism of majority rule within the list, they managed actually to unite the voice and recommend Benny Gantz. Two parties within the joint list were not satisfied. One, Balad, which did not want to go that far. And the second is Ram and Mansour Abbas among them, is that going automatically to Benny Gantz is problematic. We are willing to recommend, but not automatically Benny Gantz. Why not play the game in the middle? It could be much more effective. And of course, it didn't happen. They recommended Benny Gantz. Benny Gantz did what he did. And the differentiation between the positions became very clear. That's why I think that's what made Mansour Abbas go for splitting the joint list. That if the community votes for us that strong and commits itself to the joint list can actually respond to the expectations within the community only by taking an impartial position between the two camps in order to be able to squeeze as much as possible. Now, I think that the situation today changed a little bit. That's what brings critique on Mansour Abbas. Imagine a situation that Yesh Atid had 25 or 26 seats in the Knesset, and the ability of the Arab parties to determine which camp is the one to go with is open. Hypothetically, theoretically, it would have been much better than the situation that Mansour Abbas finds himself in now. Mansour Abbas actually chose the right strategy, but the end result will be very, very problematic for our community, because he also is in a situation that he can go with only one party. The balance of power within the system is such that the right-wing parties have a bigger majority and very much united, and have more chances, in the case he supports them, has more chances to form a coalition. According to his last talks today, the things he said, one could interpret his discourse as if trying still to keep the two options open. That he is willing to think any option and go with any option possible. In my view, the option to go with the center left is not possible, and therefore he is left with an option which is also problematic. Last comment about the remaining joint list. I think the remaining joint list lost for two main reasons. One, the split. People thought that, did not actually accuse Mansour Abbas alone in the split within the joint list. I think part of the public were aware of the way the relationship within the list took place for the last year or more, and did not trust very much what's happening in the joint list. Therefore, the split within it caused very much resentment and mistrust among the public. This is one thing. And the other thing, the other reason, is that the current joint list did not manage to bring a new voice into the system. Having Mansour Abbas as a challenge, they should have not only reacted to his own strategy, they should have brought constructively a completely new strategy that actually reinstitutes the whole political game. And they did not manage to do so. They were caught in a vicious circle of responding to Mansour Abbas, and without a new hope for the public stayed home. That's why we see the reduction or the retreat in the numbers of the current joint list. This leads us to a situation where, you know, in the best situation, structural situation possible for the Arab parties, for the Arab community, to have the major impact possible on the Israeli political system, I think the Arabs have missed the opportunity to do so. The Arab leadership, I think, has to look very critically on what happened in the last year and reorganize the entire Arab political system in order to better understand what's going on in Israeli and enable better impact on the system. This doesn't mean, by the way, going as far as Abbas is willing to go. I don't think that the sentiment of the public is not necessarily there, but the public is expecting new language, new methods, new vision in order to open the horizon for better impact on the system. Thank you very much. I hope I didn't take much.
Thanks, Amal. Appreciate it. Areen, did you want to add something?
Yeah, no, I wanted to ask Amal, Professor Amal Jamal. He said like it doesn't have to be as far as Abbas, but could this be as far as Jabha and Tajamu when they recommended Gantz? Is this what you mean, or please explain?
Well, I think these are two different situations. I think, yes, the automatic response to recommend Gantz without making sure that he is going with them was a strategic mistake. They did not take into consideration the possibility that Gantz may not meet the expectation and do what he did. This is for me is a misreading of what's going on in the system, and this says a lot about how the Arab leadership is playing in the Israeli political system. The fact that they, are in the system does not mean that they really understand what's going on in the system, and they are not cautious enough in the system. Because if they had made sure that negotiating with Gantz before recommending him fast in order to strike a deal fast and then recommend, otherwise we don't recommend, this would have opened the game for a completely different options. They did not do so. And now Mansour Abbas finds himself in a similar situation that he doesn't have an option in the center left because of the disparity within this camp between Lieberman and Meretz, between Saar and Labour Party, and so on and so on. So he is actually left in the same situation, which is problematic. Although he speaks as if he is willing to negotiate with everybody, structurally his options are limited. And I think this is also reflecting the same problem. My conclusion would be is that the Arab community, as long as they go to the Knesset, they have to be open to play the rules according to the rules of the game. And I think they are gaining enough power. And now, after they were legitimized by the right wing, like Netanyahu and so on and so on, who may change his discourse immediately after he forms a government, we know that. But still, the fact that he became Abu Yair and the fact that he spoke the way he spoke, and Lapid followed the lead and other parties followed the lead, and people are open for cooperation with Arab parties, I think reuniting the joint list or finding a new coalition, and I always said and wrote it, that the joint list is not sacred. The joint list is only a tool in order to promote Arab politics. And the moment you go to the Knesset, I think if you don't understand the rules of the game and are able to play according to the options available in the system, by the way, without forgetting that we are Palestinians, that there is a Palestinian problem, but that's the issue. When you have enough power, not only to get allocations of money in order to solve a problem here and there, but to change the entire policy, because 15 seats could have actually changed a lot in Israeli politics, and not only allocation of resources, changing the entire orientation of the system. This should be actually the aspiration for the Arab parties. And the openness of the system now for such an option and the structural split within the Israeli Jewish society, I think opens new opportunities that the Arab parties have to be able to utilize for their own interests, their own rights, and reshift the entire direction of the ship. And it's possible in my view.
Okay, if that is possible, Amal, and the question I'd like to address to Areen and to you from Samir Shahabi, is what happened with regards to Mansour Abbas here and possibly implying that he might be joining or dealing directly with Netanyahu and Likud. Is this a change in Palestinian perspective? Is it a detachment, if you will, from the 48 Palestinians from their fellow Palestinians in the West Bank and Gaza? Is it more sign of assimilation, or is it simply a different approach than the approach that is solely based on achieving your rights in Israel?
Thank you. I will answer this question. I just want to relate to Amal's what Amal said. I just want to say my attitude. I think the mistake of recommending, it's much more than mistake, but I don't find the word in English. خطيئة. It's not خطأ. Of recommending Gantz.
It's sin. Yeah,
sin. It's not it's not a strategic or a failure or mistake in how we make politics. I think it's a moral failure. It's a moral mistake. It's a political, from my national and human rights. When I say national, I don't mean national general. I mean as a Palestinian who has a just and the human rights issue as Palestinian, we should never recommend Gantz, because he's not political, he's not different than Netanyahu. This one is corrupt and this one is not corrupt formally. I don't know. This is the problem.
But now you have a member of that coalition who wants to recommend Netanyahu, who's a lot worse than Gantz. He's not necessarily better.
Yes, this is what I want to say, that I think that the process that started with this sin of recommending a one like Netanyahu or a three generals of war party led us, we gave the legitimacy, I think, by recommending Gantz to Netanyahu, because who said this is better than that? This is corrupt one man, this is not corrupt man, but politically they are not different. In all the issues, the ثوابت الفلسطينية, our beliefs as Palestinians, they do not differ at all. So I think it's not only how the way we make politics, and I don't think if we, as Amal said, it's a discussion all the time to go to the Israeli parliament, to the Knesset, or not to go. But at least as the way I view myself and my party, Balad, that I was part of establishing this party, we didn't go to the Knesset. I remember Azmi Bshara saying that all the time. We are not a classical opposition that wants to be part of the government. We don't want to be part of the government. We are going to represent our people, and not only about our Palestinians 48. We want to go to represent our national issue, and to be a moral voice, and to start to try to change the Israeli people, the Israeli citizens, try to confront Israel from a democratic, to challenge Israel from a democratic and human point of view, to talk about a state of all its citizens, like the states in all over the world. So yes, I think for the question, I think the sin of recommending Gantz led us to this discourse, and it was all the time since 48. It's not that, as I said, not that Israel is agreeing for us. all the time we had politics that wanted to cooperate or whatever with the state. But now we are seeing the different that from our national group, from our parties that used to be part of the, the consensus of the Palestinians are trying to do that. And if I have 1 minute, like Amal said, the people are expecting from us to make a change if we are going to the Knesset. Of course, if we don't have, we are not, you got to lead, not to be led. Like we promised ourselves to have a political project to change what's going on, not to be led by what the people want. Of course, the people will want us to bring them some resources, some changes, some achievements, as long as we don't promise them or they don't expect from us a structural change, a bigger change. But if we promise, if we initiate a different project, they will not wait from us to some $1 million here or some whatever achievements, material achievements. Thank you. Sorry.
Thank you, Areen.
Amal,
has the lesson been learned from the Gantz affair, Arab-wise?
Let me, Khalil, relate to this point. First of all, I think there is a lot of arrogance in what Areen said now about the public. I think the Palestinian public in Israel is instinctively very wise and knows very much that they are Palestinians and they are connected.
That's what I said. As long as you don't have a national project, because you said I am arrogant towards them.
You sound, I know you're not arrogant, you sound arrogant, and I want to correct.
I think as long as we don't have national project, they would expect from us material achievements.
They know, they have, but they have, the public.
Let Amal finish his idea.
The public has a national project, and the public knows in Jdeidi and Tamra and Taibi and Shfa'amr and Nasri and so on, know very much. They have families in the refugee camps, they have families everywhere in the Arab world. They know very much that they are Palestinians and they want to change the entire Israeli system. People are opportunistic to a certain extent, but not always opportunistic. And we have to differentiate between strategy and tactics. We want to change, we want a strategic step. And I think since we cannot bring politicians from Sweden, we are dealing with Israeli politicians, whether you like it or not. If you only want to voice your vision about what should happen, why Knesset? Why go to the Knesset? You can do it from everywhere. I'm in the academia. I can say whatever I want. I don't want to go to the Knesset. I don't want to limitations of the Knesset. I mean, this game of we go to the Knesset in order to be in the opposition only and voice our visions, you don't have to do it from the Knesset. If you go to the Knesset, you have to be aware of your strategy and subsequent tactics you need to take in order to achieve your goals, your strategic goals. Now, if the issue of course, the moral issue is there. The Palestinian issue is a moral issue. And the conflict between Palestinians and Israelis have to do with morality, definitely. But there is politics in the middle. Morality is not there. It's not a metaphysical issue only we have to view and think about. It's a realistic thing. People suffer in the villages and the towns, and they suffer from the Israeli policies because of being Palestinians. I mean, even if they forget being Palestinians, the Israeli government is enough there to remind them every day that they are Palestinians. So nobody needs to remind them they are Palestinians. The Israelis are there to remind them. This is second thing. The third thing is, we are there. I'm saying I don't have now, it's not a button you have to push, and there is no one formula that is right every time. I think politics is about how to read the situation, how to read the map, and know how to play according to the map in order to promote your interest. And the strategic interest is to gain a situation or win a situation in which you are able not only to gain, and I said it before, not only to gain resources, $1 million here, $1 million there. It's not the issue. That's what Netanyahu wants. That's what Netanyahu thinks. That's what Gantz think. That's what Lapid, by the way, also think. We can buy them. We can give them some resources, and that's enough. I think our public is not that stupid. Our public wants not to negotiate every time in order to get some resources. Our public wants to change the entire Israeli political orientation, the entire Israeli political direction, in order not to negotiate every time for some resources. They want to change policies, and in order to change policies, you need to be in a situation where you can bring the king to his throne, and without being able to bring the king to his throne, you have no power. And I think the joint list came close, very close to this place. Unfortunately, they did not manage to keep it together, and I don't want to accuse anybody here, but they did not manage as a leadership to keep it together in order to play this game now. Imagine, as I said, 15 seats now in this situation. First of all, the entire allocation of seats in the Knesset would change, and they would have much more power than only 5 seats that Mansour Abbas has. And they would not have deepened the split within the community and enable Netanyahu actually to deepen the antagonism within the Palestinian community. Because the politics that Netanyahu followed is part of his fragmentation policy that he has been following for a long time. He did not want only to split the list. He wanted actually to lower the representation of the Arabs in the Knesset in order to make sure that his right-wing parties win more seats. That's the strategy he followed, and I think we fell into the trap.
Amira and Tamir, is what Amal is suggesting doable in that Israeli system that you described earlier? Is the system amenable to Arab citizens, a minority, discriminated against, changing it in a significant way like Amal is suggesting? Not just for benefit, but inherently changing the system for the future. Amira and Tamir, go ahead if you have a comment on this. Amira, your microphone is
up. So I will refer to it. I can only say, following Antonio Gramsci, the pessimism of the intellect and the optimism of the will.
There you go.
We have lots of good reasons when we analyze the situation to believe that this task of the Palestinians in Israel to unite again and to shape and make changes faces the wall of Jewish supremacy. But at the same time, we cannot let this pessimism to stop us from keep trying. And maybe the way to do it, as I suggested earlier, is to extend the circles of political solidarity beyond the Green Line, to merge international pressure with internal dynamics in the Palestinian society and also in the Jewish society in Israel, and to keep going forward.
Amira, would you like to add something?
Yeah, it's certainly such a change would not be through the Knesset only. And even there must be some international and Palestinian and the remaining of the Israeli left-wing activism of all those parts in dimensions that we have not seen yet, in order to make Israelis, the average Israeli realize that this reality in which we live is not normal. And this is not, I don't see it as a mere prospect, but as and something that is happening soon. But something very deep and basic has to be shaken in this Israeli smugness about their normalcy. So right now, neither in the 67 occupied territory nor in 48 do I see a possibility to make major changes. In a way, I see that if we manage to block something in the Israeli expansion in the West Bank, through The Hague, through more activism, through boycott, through sanctions, it might make the Israelis think also about what's happening, about the whole thing, about the whole picture. But again, I see Palestinian people in a very weak position now, and not creative. A leadership which is not creative, and leadership which is an obstacle, unfortunately, in Gaza West Bank. That is also very much is opting more for its own nomenclatura and the position of its own nomenclatura than trying to change the rules of the game. But like you, I mean, I do want to hope that something must happen. So I also know that some things happen when we don't expect them. But it doesn't mean that we don't have, that we should give up building and planting those seeds that might make a change later.
Areen, we have a question from Dr. Sulaiman Abu Badr asking about the current seats. It looks like between 6 plus 4 plus 5 people in different parties, we're going to go back to about 14 or 15 Arab Knesset members. Is there any way that one could expect, in the logic of this hope that Amira referred to, some kind of least common denominator to emerge among these 15 Arab members of the Knesset to make a difference? Or is it a...
Yeah, is this a chance to what? I didn't understand.
A chance to have a least common denominator among all these Arabs in different parties.
Okay, thank you.
To work together on a common agenda to realize some of what Amal suggests.
Yeah, no, actually, I don't think for me Arabs, like it's Arab politics. When I say, like when we say feminists, we don't mean women. When I say Arab politics or Palestinian politics, I mean those who support, like for me, Auf al-Kasif was of course much more than part of my national project or democratic project, let's say, because the word national could be misunderstood or misinterpreted in the Palestinian context. I mean national, of course. Again, it's for me, Auf al-Kasif, of course, much more closer than Arabs in Zionist party. So no, for me, Arab or Jewish in any Zionist party, he is committed to the agenda of this party. Like I don't expect Ibtisam Marani, for example, who was now elected in the Labour Party, to be different than the politics of the Labour Party, who the Labour Party was in the Knesset now, in the government with Netanyahu. Like they didn't change their, not to talk about their historical crimes and historical project against our people and against all the, they did what happened for us since 48 or before 48. Let's take that. I just cited what Mirav Michaeli, the head of this party, said. They are part of the Israeli. They want Israel to be more liberal, looks democratic, more democratic and Jewish, whatever. But it's the same Labour Party. So of course, no, I don't see Arabs in Zionist parties as allies.
All right. I read a quote this morning from Avi Isakharov. He was writing about the results of the elections, and he said, so if I understood it correctly, the coalition of Bibi, Ben Gvir, Smotrich, and a few other well-known, I guess he was being sarcastic, Arab lovers, is currently at the mercy of a party from the house of the creator of the Muslim Brotherhood. Pleasure, he said. Amal, how can somebody work within that context to really effect change for the benefit of the Arab community in Israel. If those people are going to be part of the coalition now.
Yeah, let me not sound as if I stand fully behind Mansour Abbas. I would like to be clear. I'm not. I'm saying the possibility, opening the possibilities for such a strategy should have been the step taken by the joint list. Now, of course, there is, and I said before, what's going on now is a result or a reflection of a deep process taking place in Israeli society. There is a clear trend to the right. Netanyahu has legitimized now the Kahana party into the Knesset. It's a clear racist party, but it's not the only racist party in the Israeli political system. The entire Israeli debate, whether Arabs are legitimate or not legitimate to support a majority in the Knesset, is racist. So what I'm saying is, if we accept this, this means that all Zionist parties, including the Haredi party who are not Zionist, are racist. So should we stay home? It's an option. It's one option. The issue is, are the Arab parties willing to say the following? Either we illegitimate and part of what's going on, or we stay home. I mean, the way the Arab parties are playing the game now, or so far at least, has been legitimizing the system without gaining anything. Because you play, you stay in the opposition, you try to win here and there some resources from in the Knesset. And thereby Israel can portray itself as the only democracy in the Middle East. And here the Arabs, play the game. They are part of us, and they are tolerated and can express themselves and look at this and that. I think the price we are paying so far, is heavy, and it has to be changed. We don't want to be part of the game only in order to whitewash the Israeli democracy. We want to put clear conditions. We want to have stipulations on the game. Either we end the game and legitimate and are able to influence the game, or we are outside the game. Now, so far, there are only 1/3 or even less than 1/3 in the Palestinian community saying, boycotting the elections ideologically. This is also problematic in my view, because it's not either or. I mean, opening options in other way in order to be in and influence, or otherwise boycott completely, is, I think, also a strategy that has to be taken into consideration. But the moment you're in, you have to be able to play the game in a way that enables you to have the right impact. Not any partnership with the coalition is accepted for me. As I said, again, hypothetically, if the joint list has been together and 15 seats or 14 seats with another, Arab representative in merit, for instance, who might agree to such a strategy, saying, that Ben Gvir is out and this and this out, we are in, either we or nobody. This would have changed the rules of the game. Now, I know there is a very deep opposition within the Jewish society against such an option. I just came from a class where I discussed the result of the election, and some of the students said something, very clear about their unwillingness to see the Arab parties part of the coalition, or at least supporting the coalition from the outside, or by what is called negative vote. I know the issue is, I don't think that people with privileges will give up their privileges by their will. They have to be forced to do so, and only in a position. We are talking politics. We are not talking, now politics doesn't mean there's no morality, there's no ideology, there's no limits. But if we are talking politics, you have to know how to play the game in order to be able to do so. And you have to start in your own house. You have to start in your own politics. And I think what I'm going to do a comparison that is may sound very problematic, but I think it's true to be made. What happened in 2006, 2007 between Fatah and Hamas and the split, which was orchestrated by the strategy of Sharon, by evacuating Gaza and actually enabling what happened and deepening the split, is happening within the Palestinians in Israel now between the Islamic Party and the rest, orchestrated by Netanyahu. And but Netanyahu is, let's say, our rival, our enemy. Why play according to his game? I mean, if you don't understand what he's trying to do and you are willing to overcome this strategy with a counter strategy, so why are you in this position? Why are you leading? And I agree with Areen. Leadership has to lead, but cannot lead democratically without taking the sentiment of the public into consideration. Because at least the research we ran at Tel Aviv University, when asking the Arab public, what is the most important factor in the party that causes you to support a certain party? The first thing is not that they are Arabs. It's not that they represent my ideology. It's not that they look like me. The first thing is actually trust. Trust that I can trust them to do actually the best, to follow the best policy possible or the strategy possible in order to represent my interests. Now, if this is the main motivation for voting, you cannot ignore what the Arab public wants and what the Arab public thinks. And the Arab leadership has not been creative and innovative enough in order to follow this lead, in my view. And it has to pay the price, by the way. I think we cannot let them go without paying the price for what happened yesterday.
All right, let's end the program today with a macro question that I would like to address to all four of you. If the results are approved by the end of the week, and what we see today is it, and a government is formed under Netanyahu, he's asked to form the next government based on these numbers. What if he's indicted? And what would happen then? Would he have to resign? Would the Likud have to replace him? So let's kind of explore that from your perspective. Tamir, the question was actually addressed to you, but we'll open the question to all four speakers. So let's start with Tamir.
Well, as I see the numbers, I do not see how Netanyahu form a government without snatching some of the members of Gideon Sa'ar or Kahol Lavan, blue and white. This is the only option for him to do it. And
you don't think he can get 61 just from the right wing?
No, it is not there. Right now, he has only 59, and it is possible that he will have even less when everything will be counted. But this is what
that includes Bennett.
Yeah, now with Bennett, he has only 59.
I see,
and he might have even less. But this is how I see it, and I would say it is very dangerous to make predictions, especially about the future. But I will make a risk here. I do not think that Netanyahu is going anywhere. He's going to try to break the alliances with the other parties. Second line of defense for him is to launch a Trump-style campaign of fraud of allegations. He will not go peacefully because he's going to jail if he's going peacefully. Now, the rule of law in Israel, I think, is weaker than in the United States. I do not think that the Israeli system will be able to endure, to resist such a pressure by Netanyahu. And so I do not see him leaving the scene very soon. So we might enter a very ugly period in Israeli politics. But who knows, maybe from this crisis, it will shake up the system, and some of the changes we hope to see might emerge from it. So let's wait and see.
Thanks, Tamir. Amira.
I'm also reluctant to prophesize about the future and even the near future. And let's not forget that they still have to count the soldiers' votes. That I think can add a mandate or two to the right wing. So, and also to the one of the religious parties, even the Zionist religious party. So it's still fluid, very fluid. But I think that in a way we were caught in this in the game of Netanyahu, that he has managed to make things revolve only around him. And what I see, especially here in the West Bank, I mean, the system and the what's happening is much bigger than the doing of one person. It's really an establishment. It's an establishment that is geared to a certain goal, and it doesn't need a pilot. It is. It has become a kind of a pilotless zanan, mazlat, drone. It doesn't need it. It has a whole tradition and roots and bureaucrats, an army of bureaucrats who make this thing work. And I think the same thing in Israel. So I don't know. Maybe at if the court, I agree that the court here is and the democratic traditions are much weaker than in the States. So we often compare Trump to Netanyahu, but there was a resistance to Trump at the end that when he started to say that there was the elections were falsified. So there was a clear message, and we don't have this clear voice now. But if Likud people will see that they are in danger of losing their positions, I don't know. This also might happen. I don't think that Sar, even though he didn't get a big number of supporters, still he represents a certain tendency. Then what I really want to say is that with or without Netanyahu, we are facing the same problems and the same challenges.
Okay. Areen, 1 minute.
Okay, so since I think any new constellation will be only right, so I will not discuss it more. I will use my 1 minute to say what I think that we should do as Palestinians. I think we should rethink and reevaluate our situations that made us make this compromise with compromising our basic values and supporting and trying to be part of the Israeli game. As for what Amal said, I think our people, our community is smart. They are smart and they are wise and they are practical also. If we sell them this the campaign that we will make achievements, and we cannot make achievements because any constellation will not take us. So they know that's why they did not vote for us, okay? But if we sell them our different project and a different plan, they would respect us. If we try to be more, I think it's not accidentally that Balad is the project. I'm finishing, Khalil. was charismatic and جذاب ايش بيقولوا attracted the people and people agreed with us at the time that people were thinking that the Palestinian issue is finished and Rabin is very good with us and we succeeded. So I think the people are smart, but we have to lead them, and that's why we call the parties are leaders and not to be led again. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Amal, you have the final word.
I think we should wait until we know the end results. It's very hard to expect what could happen because of 450,000 votes of mostly soldiers and diplomats, which are usually distributed to the right rather than to the center left. This could change the entire reality.
Whole game, yeah.
Yeah, the whole game may get Netanyahu the majority he is looking for. The issue is two challenges he would have. What would Bennett demand from him in order to enter the government? Because Bennett is preparing himself to become prime minister at some point, so it's going to depend on that. And the second is what Ben-Gvir and Smotrich will demand. Otherwise, if they demand too much, Netanyahu may manipulate the system in order to go for other elections.
I have an interesting quick question. If Netanyahu ends up with 60 votes, does Mansour Abbas, is he faced with the fact to endorse Netanyahu, or can he abstain and still Netanyahu will serve?
Yeah, abstain and Netanyahu was, and Netanyahu doesn't want him actually to openly support him. It's enough that he negatively votes, which means abstain. Abstain is enough. The other side has no majority, and that's it. This is enough for him. But for that, we will have to pay a heavy price. Let's wait and see.
Thank you very much to all our four speakers. That was an excellent discussion and very dynamic. We did not solve all the problems we would have liked to solve, but at least we raised all the important issues, which makes it a very, very complex situation. Israeli electoral politics has never been dull or simple, and we got just a sample of this. Thank you to our audience for staying put with us, even though we went over time a bit. And I thought the discussion was worthwhile. Didn't want to stop it. So, and I hope you did enjoy more questions and answers. I apologize to those who we have a lot of more questions that we didn't get to. Thank you for joining us today. Thank you again to our speakers and to our audience. And we hope to see you again in a future event.